Welcome to the Stuck Mic AvCast. My name is Carl Valeri, and I'll be your host today. What is too much airplane? Are you considering upgrading your aircraft or renting or purchasing possibly an aircraft, new plane to carry friends, family? Moving up to a complex aircraft or a larger aircraft comes with some considerations, especially if the airplane you're considering is too much plane for you. Well, we're going to figure out what that plane is. As with all of us, our hobbies, we tend to want the biggest and the best, right? But sometimes smaller and adequate fulfills our needs and is more in line with our skill level. So today I want to discuss how you can tell if you're considering a plane that might be too much airplane for you, or maybe even own a plane right now that's too much airplane for you. Joining me today to discuss this is Bill English, Leslie Caubble, James Spearman, and Russ Roslewski. But before we get started, let's move on to the pre-flight checklist. Today's episode is sponsored by Stratus Financial, where dreams take flight. Stratus Financial offers loans for pilot training, and they understand your needs because they're pilots. You can find out more at stratus.finance. As a sponsor of this podcast, Stratus Financial is giving away scholarships guides, and you can get yours for free using the coupon code STRATUS when you visit aviationcareerspodcast.com/scholarships, or click on the right side of the screen on Stuck Mic AvCast where it says scholarships. Whether it's financing your dream of flying or simplifying the process by taking care of your student loans, their efficient, hassle-free funding connect you to the life of your dreams of becoming a professional pilot sooner than you ever thought possible. To find out more, visit stratus.finance. Of course, use that coupon code STRATUS and get your free scholarships guide. Let's move on to the cruise flight. Well, again, too much airplane. Do you have too much airplane? Are you considering too much airplane? And how much is too much airplane? The reason I actually brought up this topic, it's actually very exciting for me because, I read a lot. Was into boating for a long time, gotten back into it again. And we always try to move forward into a bigger plane or a plane that's actually, or I should say a boat that's, something that we can bring our friends and family on. And, I look back at my life when I used to be in boating in the islands, and I enjoyed driving my 19-foot John boat just as much as flying or driving the 85-foot boat. The 85-foot boat was a lot different. I had to get some assistance from the person that was actually the captain of the boat, and it brought me into this idea when I was thinking about the boat that I was actually driving that was 85 feet long. I said, this kind of relates to aviation. And it also was in one of the recent boating magazines. Do you have too much boat? So let's talk about that today. Trying to figure out what too much what's too much airplane is. And I think it's really important for us to realize that there can be too much airplane for you, but trying to figure out that formula can be a little bit daunting sometimes. And just one of the things I want to start off with is the fact that when we're looking at an airplane, whether it's renting or buying, when we first get into aviation, if you're someone that just started in aviation, sometimes you think the bigger the plane, the safer it is, or the more motors it has, the more engines it has, might be safer, and it actually is going to be better for me. And that may not be the actual whole truth. So if you're someone who's just getting started, I'd really encourage you to do a lot of research, listen to podcasts like this, and find out whether you need a bigger airplane or whether a 152 is perfect for you. Just a quick story before we talk about certain things to consider as far as flight training. One day, I think it was in Andover Aeroflex Airport. It's up in New Jersey. I was watching this gentleman. He was taking off and landing on the grass part of the runway, and he saw me, with my hands over the fence and looking at his airplane and admiring what he was doing, and he was in a 152. And he stops the airplane, pulls over, and says hi to me after he shuts down. And he starts talking to me. This is really early in my career. And he says to me, I had 3 other partners in this airplane. I was like, well, gosh, what happened to those partners? I'm thinking the worst. He said, all those partners decided to get bigger airplanes. And you know what happened? They all had to sell them eventually because they got to be too much to maintain, too much to hangar, too much insurance. And now I actually own this 152 outright, and I'm the only one still flying. And that resonated throughout my entire career, and that was so many years ago. And so ever since then, I've always been trying to figure out what is the best size airplane for me. But there's a lot of things we can consider when we're considering an airplane that might be bigger. So let's kick it over to Russ to talk about what you should start considering when you're thinking about moving into maybe a bigger airplane?
Well, one of the things that I've seen a lot through my flight instruction work is people that buy a new airplane and really have trouble finding training for it. Okay, because they got some unique airplane, they got some warbird, they got some oddball thing, right? It's not a Bonanza, right? It's not a Baron. It's something a little unusual, and they buy the airplane. And then they're scouring, the forums and the US and everywhere trying to find someone to train them in this airplane. Especially the rarer it is more likely the insurer is going to require some kind of training, even if technically you are qualified by the FAA to fly this airplane, right? So insurance is a factor we're going to get to in a minute too, but just being able to find someone, even to deliver the airplane to you, get you checked out in it. It's a thing, and actually keeps some ferry pilots pretty busy, moving these kind of airplanes around. There are specialists, of course, if the airplane model is, how do I word this, rare but not too rare, I guess you would say. I know a guy who he travels around the U.S. providing training in glass airplanes. Okay, so he makes a little career of it, right? Well, there's not that many people in the U.S. that can provide training in glass airs, right? Similar, Bill English here. I know for a while ago he was kind of a specialist in what was it, like a turbine 210 or something, but there just aren't very many of them. So this is one of the factors you really need to consider before you get something that's unusual. Okay, I guess. But it doesn't have to be that unusual before you really need to pay attention and start lining things up. I recently started flying a 2018 G58 Baron for this owner. Okay, owner's not a pilot. I had to get checked out by someone who met certain insurance requirements. It was actually fairly tricky to meet the insurance requirements for the checkout pilot for a Baron, because they wanted a very specific make and model and amount of time in that airplane. And just given the part of the country I'm in, it was a little bit tricky to find. Okay, if you're you're in LA, maybe there's a million pilots that are qualified to fly your airplane or train you in it. But if you're in, South Dakota, maybe not so much. So it's a factor. It's something to consider as you're going through the process of looking at this airplane.
That's actually some interesting advice there. Speaking of which, I think, we had a previous episode where, Bill, that was the 337 that you actually had a lot of experience in. And I guess, tell us a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Really, you're both right. Both P210 and 337. So big Cessnas, by coincidence, I've got a lot of experience on, and have a lot of experience in exactly what Russ is talking about, is owners that found an airplane and maybe didn't quite think a lot of this stuff through. The 337, you remember it. We brought it down to Sun and Fun last year. But that owner, they bought the airplane before they found any training, and that became an issue. They ended up finding me, and we did get some training going. But again, that the owner just really didn't know any better. There was nothing nefarious or anything like that, but he just bit off more than he could chew. And that's what happens, because it's more than just having that cool, hot airplane, but there's the training burden, and it's more than just finding the instructor. How much time has he got to invest in studying all this? It's a complex airplane, very fast, high performance, a lot of systems to learn on top of just the basic training. So that was quite difficult for that owner. And as it turned out, again, the training petered out and he sold it. And the P210 owner that I worked with as well was the same. Bought it for what he thought was going to be his mission. And that's probably the most important thing to think about. What really is your mission with this airplane? You say, I'm going to go fly to Colorado for ski vacation. Well, you might do that once a year. If that's why you're buying the airplane, you've got to understand how much overhead there's going to be with that, how much training, studying, not just financial overhead, but just time invested and attention invested in that. Whereas you might find something that's maybe not exactly that high mountain airplane, but one you're going to use the other 350 days out of the year. And that's one thing that people they get starry-eyed. They see this is what I want to do. This is the goal that I'm going to have, and kind of jump right to that without really thinking through the mission.
I'm glad you brought that up, Bill, because One of the things that I've been looking at is an airplane. I'm between airplanes right now. And I didn't realize until I looked at my logbook, and also I asked my family and friends what I was going to do, that, the plane that I envisioned was actually different than the best plane to fulfill that mission. And there was some very simple things that it came down to, which is good because actually the cost might come down a little bit, but that's some great advice. Speaking of cost, James, one of the things that I think that we sometimes don't consider when we're moving up into a bigger airplane, and I've seen actually someone do this by just a King Air sight unseen, was in a different business, didn't know aviation very well, and said, well, I fix up buildings, I can do the same thing with an airplane. The problem is it's different, isn't it, in airplanes, James?
Yeah, so I see it a lot. Customers, roll straight from, let's say a Cherokee 180 and go straight to a Baron or a Navajo or a Cessna 414, 421, and they're used to maybe a six. The worst annual they've ever had is 6,000, and then and now they're not leaving the hangar for less than 30,000, and that they should get used to that. But the brief story that comes to my mind is the book, the Checklist Manifesto, which it goes into the origins of the checklist developed by the military, and it talks about the B-17, which was the airplane that was finally too much for people to keep everything in their head and roll through the checklist. It had 4 engines, 4 cowl flaps, 4 throttles, 4 prop levers, all this stuff. And on the initial takeoff in front of the Air Corps, they crashed it and killed everyone because the pilots made a mistake and they forgot a step. And the B-17 almost did not become in existence because of that mistake in front of the Air Corps. And then eventually they realized, well, no, it's not necessarily the airplane's fault. It's the people's fault. It's just too much to remember. And so I think it too much for airplane for a customer is all of a sudden the most immediate thing is like gear. All of a sudden that is really, really important. Gear up and down. and then you've got cowl flaps, you've got 2 throttles, 2 props, 2 mixtures. All of these things start coming into play before you even get into how much the insurance may become, how much the maintenance it can become. Those are just my general thoughts.
Is there a rule of thumb that you might have, like if you move up, say, in horsepower, how much extra may be, like 1.5 or percentage, or is there no such thing out there?
Well, I would say it's not like a twin. I would say like a single engine piston, the retractable gear adds a significant amount to the annual. I would say 1.5 when not necessarily the horsepower, but the additional gear that we need to inspect, or now TKS systems, oxygen systems. All of this is added. Extra stuff that you need to look at now. If you go to a twin, it's not like it's 2 times 1 engine. It's like 2.5 or 3 times the maintenance costs of 2 engines.
Absolutely.
I think people, really don't appreciate that when you're first shopping for an airplane, especially if it's your first air. Well, I guess we're talking about upgrading here, but there's a dramatic difference between your basic, Cherokee 140, 180, fixed gear, fixed pitch prop, basic single engine airplane, and something that's far more complicated, like you mentioned, James, with, anti-icing systems and all this kind of thing. All those systems need their own kind of inspections and repairs and all this kind of things. So you see routinely these people that they have this budget in mind of what they're going to spend on this airplane, right? And it doesn't matter what the number is, but say it's $100,000, right? So I have $100,000 to spend on an airplane, and they go out and buy an airplane that costs $100,000, right? Well, that left them no room for that first annual, for the things that are going to go wrong that first year. There's got to be a pretty big buffer in there, and maybe if you have $100,000, you're looking at a $70,000 or $60,000 airplane, because those unexpected costs are what kill a bunch of not kill, but they ruin a bunch of people's ownership experiences, especially in that first year. And then they get down the first year and they're like, oh my goodness, what have I done? And I'm sure you see this all the time.
Yeah, so typically the first annual, it's just like when you go to sell anything. Normally, you're not going to put as much into it, right? Because you're going to sell it. It's like, well, I'm not going to fix that because I'm going to get rid of it anyways. Well, that happens all the time with airplanes. And then the person that inherits that, it inherits all of those, right? So you're normally the first 2 annuals is normally you're working out all these squawks. And then by the 3rd annual, now you've got it down. Most people don't realize that.
So, James, one more thing I wanted to ask you on that is, as far as the cost, there's another pilot cost that we didn't talk about, and I think that's important. Sometimes you have a pilot that might be able to fly the plane for you. Maybe you don't intend to actually fly it. So how about in that case? I mean, you actually fly some or have some aircraft that you have a lot of pilots that train in those, and you actually have people that are specialized in like Cirrus and that type of thing. Do you ever run into people that say, "Hey, I'm probably not I'm gonna buy this, but it's just more for a hobby, and I'm gonna let someone else fly it"?
Well, typically what I'll see is a business owner that likes to fly, but they know they're not going to stay proficient in the airplane, so they'll have somebody sit in the seat with them when they go fly. And typically, just to have that level, I mean, they're spending $800 to $1,200 on a day rate for a pilot. They're not going to spend, no pilot that is rated at that level is going to do 2 hours or 3 hours. They're typically going to charge you their full day rate, which is starting to get closer to $1,200 even in the Cirrus level airplanes.
Wow. Yeah, speaking of that, I was looking at an airplane, and one of the things I didn't realize, and it was funny because I had a conversation with Leslie on this, is that it wouldn't fit in the hangar I was looking at. And I don't know if you remember, Leslie, we were discussing the cost of the hangar here, and it was kind of funny when I said the cost and I thought it was expensive, your comment was, "Wow, that's not that expensive."
Yeah, I think you quoted maybe $700 a month, and I just thought, okay, back when I was in Hawaii, I would get 3 hangars at $700 a month. Yeah, hangar space is a real issue, something that you need to think about. And maybe if you are, we're talking about upgrading planes, of course, but maybe you're upgrading from a 172 to a 182, which is not a huge step, but it is a big step. And you say, okay, it's just a 182. I can just park it on the ramp for a while. But you got to think about your location and the conditions, the environment that it's going to be exposed to, because I know James can probably talk an hour about, surface corrosion and engine corrosion and just the different hazards to your aircraft if it's out on, on a tie down long term. Now, that's pretty much all I have experience with, except for back in Arkansas, we did have a hangar there. But if you can even find a hangar. So when John and I moved down to Southwest Florida, one of the first things we did was we went to Page Field at Fort Myers, and we asked the person at the FBO, hey, what does the hangar wait list look like? Because we want, we're looking at getting an aircraft sometime. And she said, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe this, but it's probably about 7 years right now. And just like, I wasn't surprised at the cost of the hangar. I wasn't surprised at the wait list either. That's very, very typical during this time, is to have to wait 4, 5, 6, 7 or more years. Before we moved to Maui in early 2017, I guess it was the end of 2016, we applied with the airport manager at the Kahului Airport, a letter of intent to get on the wait list for a hangar there. We had no airplane. We didn't have a flight school yet, but that was our dream someday to have that. And however many years, it was 6 years later, I guess, we got a letter in the mail, certified letter in the mail in November after we got here to Florida, and said, congratulations, you now have a hangar. So after all that time. So that's something you have to consider. So even if you have access to one, is it within your budget? Just like the maintenance, there's just a lot of fixed costs that you need to look at, but also the variable costs as well, especially if you're getting a bigger airplane.
Leslie, to add to that, sometimes there's airplanes that you really should have in a hangar. I remember when I first started looking at a Warbird, and I said, well, I'll just park it on the ramp. And my friend who owns a similar Warbird said, yeah, you're not going to want to do that. This investment sitting on this ramp is not a real great idea. But importantly too, not just with the hanger is will you need one? What size will it be? Will it fit in the hanger? And that actually, like you said, can be a long time on the wait list. By the way, I've been on a wait list here, and my number came up, and I didn't have an airplane. Well, one of the things I found out too is that you can't just hold on to a hanger if you don't have an airplane that is actually insured and also based at the airport, because I was going to let my friend use it. And I said, well, can't my friend just use it every so often? They're like, no. It actually has to be based here. So that was kind of a learning process there. But besides the hangar space and the costs involved with that, one of the things we have to look at is our skills. And one of the most important things is to get proper training. And in the aircraft, whatever it may be that we're going to fly. And that is something that I think is kind of key to this discussion is, a lot of times when I'm looking at an applicant or somebody who wants to start flying, I look at their talents and I look at the training and I say to them, hey, listen, if you have certain talents, that's great. But if we have a mix of really good training and some talent, I think we can make a good pilot no matter what the airplane. And that goes to, look what I do. I take people who are flying a Cherokee one day, now they're flying an Airbus the next day. And that's just through training. And you have to have good training. And I'm sure, Leslie, you've seen people that have gone from all these, and I know you have all these different types of airplanes. And I'd like to hear your comments on what you feel about training and how important it is.
Well, of course, as an instructor, it's super important and required for many cases. I mean, maybe you have to get your complex or your high performance or high altitude endorsements. You're going to have to do that with a flight instructor. And beyond just getting the regulatory endorsements that you have to fly these bigger, faster, more complex aircraft, you've got to take an honest look at yourself and an honest look at your logbook as well and say, is it the right time? Maybe it's not a never answer to the question, but maybe you need to wait. Maybe you need to get a little bit more proficient in the aircraft that you're flying currently or that you haven't been flying for a while. I just watched a AOPA Air Safety Institute video this past week, and some of our listeners have probably seen it before. And it was a guy that had a Bonanza. He had an A36, I don't think he flew at all for about 8 years, and then bought a PC-12 and then got checked out in it. I think he had 25 hours in it, and then went up on a flight with his family. And unfortunately, that flight did not end up very well. And, when you get into these new aircraft, it's not just the checkout time. It's, it really needs to go beyond that. And maybe you feel comfortable after getting checked out, but you need to keep that training going. And I think, a good rule of thumb is every 3 to 6 months, get that flight instructor back in the right seat with you and do another proficiency flight and learn more things, because you may get the basics down of just how to land the plane or how to recover from a stall, and you've got your V speeds down pat, but maybe you don't know how to fully utilize your avionics or your autopilot to its capabilities. So there's always something new to learn in these aircraft. And Russ was mentioning earlier about sometimes the challenge is to find a flight instructor that has experience in these bigger aircraft. And some places that you can look are, type clubs. There's even Facebook groups where you can make some, get networked and make some connections there. There are flight instructors out there that, as we mentioned, that train specifically. They kind of have these niche training environments or flight schools. Cirrus is a good example. You can find a Cirrus instructor, pretty much in every region of the country nowadays. And other aircraft owners can be a great asset and resource as well. Maybe you have a friend or can get connected with another pilot that owns this type of aircraft. And just go, sit next to them and just start absorbing it and, like by osmosis, and start learning about the aircraft and the nuances of it. But there's things you can do at home too. As you're upgrading to the aircraft, you can do chair flying. You can get on a simulator, with that type of aircraft. There's always something you can do. And definitely, grabbing a POH, a pilot's operating handbook, or the flight manual, not just for the aircraft itself, but for all of the avionics inside as well. And just start combing through it and reading, and getting up to speed on that before you even hop in the seat.
Yeah, those are some great examples. The one thing I love what you said is proficiency training. Just to add to that point, many of us that are in aviation for a long time think that multi-engine aircraft are more dangerous, and there's statistics to prove it. But multi-engine aircraft with proper training can actually be very safe, and that's your point. What you said about is to consistently go back and get training is incredibly important. And had a student that actually lost an engine on takeoff and just came right back around the pattern and landed right afterwards. But this student, every 6 months, would get in the airplane with an instructor. Now, how many of us do that? How many of us, actually have somebody evaluate us? And I think that is really important when it comes to training. And hey, Bill, you had a comment on training as well?
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to, well, first off, echo what Leslie was talking about, the specific training. She mentioned Cirrus, the CSIP program. Beach has the BPPP, however many Ps there are. Find that kind of specific training for your type of airplane, and I mean, I went through that, changing mission, with the airplanes that I had, right? I had the Beach for a while, nice traveling airplane, and decided, well, I wasn't flying it very much either because it didn't match the mission, and I was getting rusty on something I was even totally capable with. Changed over completely now to the 170. But another facet of training that brought up, and I think, Leslie, you kind of hinted at it as well, not just in the move up, but people, when they go into their training, whatever it is they're doing, training for a new rating, even an initial rating. You mentioned earlier, Carl, about everybody wants the biggest and the best and the nicest, right? We talk about the glass cockpit. You think about that when you're, if you're not at that level yet. I know we'll have a lot of listeners here who are nowhere near upgrading to a Bonanza or a Turbo 206, but they're just getting into their training now. Do you really need to do your basic private pilot training in a G1000 3-axis autopilot synthetic vision Cessna? Probably not. It's nice. It's cool stuff. But you've got a lot of extra moving parts there that when you're just out learning how to make a square pattern and land, you probably don't need that kind of expense and complication around your basic training. So this concept fits pretty much anywhere in phases of training, right from the very beginning up to people who've been flying for a long time. I don't mean that you should not come and rent fancy G1000 airplanes from my flight school, but I'm just kind of making a point there.
Yeah, well, and we'll put a link to his website where you can actually rent one of those fancy G1000 airplanes.
We got it.
But as I said, I'm glad you brought up that whole part about the aircraft and moving up. Too much airplane, and I was kind of hoping someone would key on this, but too much airplane can actually mean something smaller to certain people, and that's a key point. Because I think as an industry, we don't do a very good job training airline pilots to fly small airplanes. And the reason I say that is that if you're an airline pilot listening, we have a lot of folks that listen that are airline pilots, and you want to go get yourself a J3 Cub or a Champ or something like that, I'd encourage it. It's been maybe 30 years since I've flown a Champ. What I would do, though, is get with an instructor, but find an instructor that actually wants to help you. And by saying that we do a terrible job teaching airline pilots how to fly small airplanes, the reason being is that many times we don't understand there's a huge difference between landing a 777 and landing a Champ. And especially if you're not very, experienced as an instructor. Remember, the worst thing you can do to somebody when they show up and they've been flying for years and they decide to land this airplane, they do a terrible job. The worst thing you do is say to them, "Hey, you're a horrible pilot." And I've heard that so many times, and it's amazing. I guess about my landings especially, but it's amazing though to see how if I did that at work, because I instruct at my job, I'd get fired for saying that. But as a customer base that's out there are a lot of folks that are really afraid of coming in. I'm telling you, there's airline pilots that are afraid to walk in the door and say, "Hey, I want to fly that airplane," because that instructor thinks that pilot can fly that airplane right away and be great at it, and they aren't. You got to make sure that you know your audience. So too much airplane may not be a bigger plane, like even a King Air. That might be easy for someone to fly who's been an airline pilot, but the J3 Cub, that's going to be a challenge. And I think that's really, really important. And that's really important as far as, transitioning from going from the bigger planes to the smaller airplanes. And I tell you, hats off, by the way, to AOPA. I just wanted to give a shout out to them for what they do for rusty pilots. And rusty pilots meaning those guys that haven't and gals that haven't flown smaller airplanes. But that's really, really important. Russ, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just got a comment that kind of goes into, I guess, sort of the convenience of the airplane, or also the proficiency we've talked about, and the mission as well. So you've got your 172. It was your first airplane, right? You bought a 172, and you fly it. You fly it every weekend. You go to pancake breakfasts all across your state and whatever, right? And so you're flying the thing all the time. All right, then you buy your Bonanza, and you're doing about the same. You're probably you're flying further, put more time on it, but you're still flying all those pancake breakfasts, all that kind of stuff. Well, then you win the lottery or whatever, and your business is successful, and you buy a TBM, right? Great airplane, wonderful capability. Are you going to fly the TBM to the pancake breakfast every week? How much does that cost, right? So no, probably not. So now you've got a dramatically more complicated airplane, operating in a completely different, realm of aviation, higher speeds, higher cost, higher fuel flow, everything, right? IFR in the system, all that kind of thing. But you're flying it less. Your trips may be longer, but you're not flying it, a couple of times a week. You're not going on that, flight at sunset just because you had the time, that you were doing in your 172. So you got a more complicated airplane and you're flying it less. So that doesn't mean don't buy that TBM. It means be aware of, hey, I'm going to actually, since I'm going to be using this airplane probably more for actual, not fun flights, but missions, business or getting to vacation or whatever, I'm going to have to specifically seek out training on a recurrent basis, more than what the FAA requires, more than what my insurer probably requires, because I'm not going to be flying this thing. This is an airplane that some, charter pilots, they fly every single day. And even they have, recurrent training requirements. Here you are, it's your personal airplane. You're flying it a couple times a month, maybe, right? You need to find and seek out that, and force yourself to have a schedule of recurrent training, probably more often than you think you should.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, one of the things that we wind up doing is saying to ourselves, well, I have this other airplane in the hangar. I can fly that at any time. Well, if it sits there for months, you might want to think twice about jumping in it and flying it. Maybe do a little chair flying before you do jump into that aircraft. Grab an instructor.
I agree with that. Sure.
Absolutely. But, one of the other things, too, is when we're actually looking at moving up, getting into an airplane that we're thinking might be too much airplane, there's a lot of different considerations, especially, what we might be planning to do. And Leslie, what do you think as far as when we're looking at something that is a new airplane to us that we're moving up to, when we're trying to balance that plans of what we plan to do and also our abilities?
So I'm going to answer that question just by telling a story from back when we were on Maui. We had a flight school, and we had these newly minted private pilots would come to me and say, okay, I've got my private pilot certificate now. I'm going to buy an aircraft. Or there was this Cicada Trinidad on the field, and they were always looking for a new partner in the aircraft. So I would say probably 50% of our new pilots would say, I'm going to partner in that Trinidad that's in the hangar over there. And, all the things that James talked about, insurance and maintenance. And here we were in Hawaii, where parts and shipping those parts are just, 2 to 3 times the price. And then you've got, an aircraft that there's no other Cicada aircraft in the islands that I'm aware of, or that flies regularly. There may be some stuck in a hangar someplace. So, it's the training, it's the getting the parts, the insurance. And so it came down to these 2 students about the same time. One was a guy who, I'm going to not say their names to protect the innocent, but he would rent one of our 172s, and he'd take his 13-year-old son, and he would fly the same 30 to 45 minute route all the time. And he'd do it once a month. never went to Honolulu, never went to the Big Island, just the same little loop all the time. And we've had hours and hours of conversations over the phone about him wanting to buy into this partnership and a Trinidad is it's a complex, high performance aircraft. It's sleek. It had a glass panel. And I just said, Steve, does it really fit your mission? And, are you planning to expand your business and, fly to inter-island? And maybe that would make more sense. And he was like, oh, but it would just be cool to have. And he was counting the costs and all that. He wound up not doing it. And he actually texted me a couple of months ago and just said, hey, I'm so glad that we had these conversations. I didn't really talk him out of it, but it just made him really think about what were his plans and, what were his abilities. He had no intentions of getting his instrument rating. He just wanted to fly around with his son VFR. And I said, I don't know if this is going to make sense for you. Well, then we had a local doctor who had plenty of money for the partnership, wasn't worried about the expense of shipping parts over, but he wanted to go right into his instrument training. And he had kind of the same thing. And he said, I said, are you going to open up a practice on a different island? He said, no, I don't even know. My wife is not really interested in flying with me, but he has like 3 sports cars. He's like, I just want to get in the air and just fly fast. I just want to fly fast. And I've got the money for it. I'm going to get my instrument rating. And so I just said, you know what? To me, it didn't make sense, but to him it did. And that was just like a passion of his. And he's within probably, I think, a month of his IFR check ride now. So you really have to, it's like weighing the pros and cons and thinking about what are you planning to do with the aircraft? What is your mission? What are your activities? And, talk to your family about it because you have to have that support system too. For me personally, I'm kind of in the middle of it right now. And on a smaller scale, I've always been a Cessna 172 girl. I mean, that's my jam. That's my bread and butter. But we have to open ourselves to different things. And, we would like to get something that's more of a cross-country machine, like, an SR-22 or maybe a Cessna 182, so we can take it occasionally back to Arkansas to see our family. But it has to make sense for us on a business side as well, because we just don't have that type of cash laying around or that we want to, spend all that money on. So we have to figure out, does it make sense for us and how can we weave this into possibly training other people or making it available for rental? And, that opens another big can of worms, but we've done that for the past 10 years. So we know what we're getting into when we do something like that. But, I'm kind of in those self questions right now, thinking about, does it make sense? What are my plans? What is my mission? And what am I going to do with it?
That actually is going to be a fun thing to watch as you guys kind of that evolves, and we definitely want to watch you as far as while you're figuring out what's going to be next for Leslie and John. What's next in their mission and fitting that. I have to say I've had a lot of different airplanes, and every one of them I've loved. But they all have a different mission. And doing pattern work in a 182 probably isn't the best thing to do. But going to Georgia or going to somewhere far away is a great airplane for that cross country. So some good points there. Anything else you wanted to add to that? Because I did want to ask James about something that was considering type specific training. There's somebody that I actually had the pleasure of having at the school, and she flew this airplane that was really cool. And correct me if I'm wrong, James, you actually have one. And she actually became the chief instructor in this region for Icon aircraft. And boy, what a neat aircraft. And I started looking at my mission saying, hey, listen, I want to take this out to the islands to the east in the Bahamas. This would be a perfect airplane for that. What was amazing is here's somebody who's in sales with that aircraft, went off for about 10 minutes telling me the limitations, which I didn't expect, but it was great for me to understand, there's certain limits. And I wasn't thinking about this because I've seen a lot of big seaplanes, the size of waves and things like that. So James, I'm pretty sure you still have the Icon. When someone's doing that type of specific training, what type of misconceptions do most people have when they walk in the door?
So the Icon is very unique. If anyone has seaplane any seaplane training, it's almost. I mean, you could transition to the Icon very easily, but I don't think you go from the Icon to like a plane on floats. It is incredibly easy to fly. It has a spin-resistant airframe. It has the same ballistic parachute that the Cirrus has. It won't spin, and the stall is extremely gentle. And when it touches down on the water, you can hardly feel it. The propeller's behind you, and it's got a jet ski hull. And not to mention, you're much lower in the water, right? On a float plane, you're much higher above the floats, so that's kind of an issue. I mean, you're touching down, your butt's touching the water, you're at the water line, and so it's really easy. I'll take people out in it, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, and teach them. Give them the old, how to pull back, houses get smaller, push forward, houses get bigger, left, right, hand it to them, and they'll fly me all the way down the lake and back. It's just, so the tough thing with the Icon and really any plane like that is it does add the complexity of, you're landing. When you land on the water, the gear's got to be up, and when you land on the land, the gear has to be down. And there is no gear horn in the Icon, naturally, right? Because you're landing on the water, and it would be going off all the time. So you have to be diligent, either with a mantra or the checklist, to make sure that you're appropriately configuring the aircraft to where you're landing. There's other limitations, like once you slow it down. Although it's very maneuverable, you do have a water rudder that has a limitation of just a handful of knots, and that'll get you around docks and stuff. But it's stupid how fun that plane is. At 28 knots up on full plane, you can kick full rudder and it'll do a 180 just like a jet ski in the water, and it'll lean in the turn like a jet ski. So I think it's one of the easiest planes I've ever flown. Probably too easy, but just easy enough to really get you in trouble.
Good point. And there's limitations to that aircraft. I mean, there's just like sea state. I mean, that's something else we don't think about. But so I've seen people get in trouble just flying in a certain type of seas that they really shouldn't be involved with when they're flying a seaplane. That's for sure. Also, not just looking at the seaplane, obviously, the rating, endorsements. And Russ, I was wondering maybe if you could take this, talking a little bit about endorsements that we should think about when we are moving up into another airplane, because people are like, well, what do I need to do now that I have this plane that has this landing gear and a controllable pitch propeller that I've never used before?
Well, sure. Of course, there are the standard endorsements that most of us kind of are aware of. You want to go get checked out in that Arrow. You got to have your complex endorsement for retractable landing gear, right? You want to go get checked out in a 182 at the school. You got to have your high performance endorsement for more than 200 horsepower. So those are pretty common ones. Of course, there's also the tailwheel endorsement if you're interested in that. There's a high altitude endorsement. We're talking about upgrading your airplanes, right? Well, what if you buy something that's pressurized and goes up there pretty high? So a high altitude endorsement is definitely something you will need. That's 4. Did I miss any of the endorsements?
Those are the big ones.
I think, yeah, those are the big ones. Well, if I missed them.
Those are absolutely the big ones. And it's interesting what you said about high altitude. That's something else. I mean, sometimes we don't think about, and that's something that I had to do when I wound up flying a jet that actually someone else wanted me to fly with them. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have my high altitude endorsement. And I was like, oh my gosh, I better go out and get that. So we actually had
I think the main difference with the high altitude endorsement is it's easy to find airplanes to do a complex endorsement or a high performance, right? I mean, and that's just something that a lot of people will just do to kind of expand their aviation knowledge after they get their private certificate, right? But you're going to rent a Cessna 421 to do your high altitude endorsement? No, probably not, right? So that can catch people. And I mean, and actually your situation, I had a similar situation where, I was going to be hired to fly it was a 421 actually. I don't know if I have my high performance endorsement. I need to go get that real quick. So it kind of sneaks up on you. Now, of course, that's something that you would usually get in association with the training to fly that new airplane, right? So it goes back to the transition training question we talked about, and insurance required or otherwise. If you are going to go buy a Malibu or something, right? Well, part of your training needs to be that high altitude endorsement, because there are the reason for the endorsement is, of course, the aeronautical environment is different. The lack of oxygen and how you're going to get down quickly, and different effects, and that's very, very valuable training. Go ahead.
A good point there too is that if you may think you have one because you've been working a job that has an airplane that flies altitude, but you don't actually have the endorsement in your logbook. So if you are getting training somewhere, ask them to put that logbook endorsement if they're an instructor.
It's interesting, and I'm glad you brought that up, Carl, because there have been a couple similar discussions on the forums in the last couple of weeks, and maybe that's where you got it from. I don't know, but of where people were asking, "Hey, I've been flying this this citation for the last 10 years, and I don't have a high altitude endorsement. Am I just like grandfathered in?" And the answer is no, you're not, unless you got it before some date in the, I don't know, 97 maybe, something like that. But in general, no, you're not grandfathered in. It may have been overlooked and nobody caught it yet, but you want to correct that. You want to be legal, and you don't want it to cause a problem later on.
Yeah, the reason I brought that up is about 20 years ago, I was asked to do some sales for Hawker, and that was I didn't have my altitude endorsement. So they wanted me to go out and fly the thing and do some demonstrations. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I got to get this thing. So
Right.
so my buddy brought me out on the Hawker. We did it in there and did the ground training and all that. It was kind of interesting. But yeah, I love how you brought that up, because again, a lot of people are thinking transitioning from maybe working another job in corporate or the airlines, and now they want to go fly an airplane that they need a high altitude endorsement for. You may not have in your logbook. So that's really important. We don't have many minutes left, but I do want to mention one more thing, and I can't remember who put this link up here, but one of the really important things to consider, and sometimes I wish I had Victoria back on the show, or Victoria Newville, to talk a little bit about insurance. And that's something that's a real big consideration. That kind of bit me once. I actually was talking to Victoria years ago, and I think it was a 182 that I was flying. And I said, well, gosh, why don't I just do some flight instruction in this? It's just like a 172. She's like, no. She says the insurance is going to be a little bit different. And when she came back with this quote that was $5,000 more than I expected, I was like, holy cow, this is way too much money for me to just kind of teach a friend of mine. Maybe I'll go back to the 172. So that's a really big consideration, is not only the insurance cost, but can you get insured? And you may not be able to get insured because you don't have the type specific training in that aircraft yet, or the amount of hours that are needed for the insurance. Something that kind of bites a lot of people when they go out and they buy a Cirrus or they buy something that like even a King Air or something like that. Yeah, you can buy the King Air, get your type rating. You can't fly it though. So those are the kind of things you have to think about within that whole insurance realm. So that's really important. We'll have a link, by the way, in the show notes, just discussing insurance. And I think that was, I can't remember who put that out there, but it was really good stuff.
Hey, Carl, I got a couple comments on insurance. I mean, I highly recommend that if you're looking to buy anything, a higher kind of upgrade from what you have now, you start working with your insurance agent before you start shopping for the airplane. I mean, honestly, because you need to get a handle on what types of airplane you could even get insured for. Yeah, maybe you want that King Air, but if there's no way you can insure it, well, save yourself some time shopping.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or develop a plan with your broker, your agent, on how you're going to become insurable, because it's so much of a case by case basis. It's so unlike car and home insurance, where everything is pretty much cut and dry. It's so case by case basis. You can work with your agent to say, here's what I'm going to do. Here's the plan. Within a year, I'm going to get this kind of experience, blah, 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 and then I'll be insurable. I mean, that kind of thing. If you start that after you've bought the airplane, it's too late.
Absolutely. And Bill, thanks for putting that link out there for the insurance. We'll have that in the show notes. That's really important. This has been a great discussion, and I really appreciate everything everybody's brought to this whole discussion, but you know what? It brings up a lot more questions. And if you have questions, by the way, contact at stuckmikeavcast.com or stuckmikeavcast@gmail.com, and we will answer them right here. Also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. I know there's a lot more conversations going on YouTube, and a lot of podcasts are moving there, and we've decided to put a lot of these shows out there on YouTube. So please do that, because there's some cool things that are out there in the pictures, what we're going to talk about here shortly, and you get to see our faces too in the YouTube videos. I know most of you listen to us on their podcatcher, but I'd love to see you out there on YouTube. Let's start a conversation. But let's move into the after landing checklist. And now in the after landing checklist, we're going to talk about the picks of the week. We're back to that, and I'm so excited to get this started. By the way, one more thing I want to make as a comment. I am actually super excited to be back to doing these shows regularly, and a lot of people really have said to us, we love the conversations that you guys have, and it really has been a blessing for me. So I do appreciate the emails I've been getting from people saying that we love to see Stuck Mike back, and I really appreciate that. So that's heartfelt thanks to everybody. But my pick of the week is actually, if you're watching this on YouTube, and I hope I don't mess this up, I'm going to move the camera a little bit, but my pick of the week is the METAR map, and that's over my shoulder here. I'm pointing at the METAR map, and I'm going to move slightly here. I don't like to do this when I'm recording, but as you can see, METAR maps it's the cross between aviation, METARs and art. It really is a piece of art. And one of the things that I absolutely love about METAR maps, I turn the lights off, but then I would really ruin this. But one of the things I love about this, it reminds me of Christmas, because when I was a little kid, one of the things that I loved to do is sit underneath the tree when it had all the tinsel on it and had all the different lights, and look at the lights and the changing lights in the tree. So all of a sudden, I felt like a little kid again. And it took me, and you can ask my wife this, it took me 3 years to buy this, to convince myself to actually spend the money to buy this thing. And after I got the bill, I realized why it took me 3 years to think about it. They're a little expensive, but they're a whole bunch of fun. And they update over the internet, and you can change the settings. You can actually change it so that it'll show the temperatures, it'll show the METARs, it'll actually show lightning. I don't have that on right now because it's a little distracting. And it actually, another thing it'll do is it does the ICAO, but it also will do the Garmin representation of VFR and marginal VFR and that type of thing. So it's between the FAA and also between Garmin. So it's a whole bunch of fun. You can buy METAR maps with, like I have here in the picture, of the whole United States. You also can get small ones. I was thinking of putting one up above me of where I am here in Florida. They'll also make them for your specific airport, and you can have them, they turn on and off automatically. And it's just something that, I don't know about you, but I could sit there for just a long time, just mesmerized looking at the airports. And another really cool thing about it, it makes me think about all the flights I did to all those different airports. So this is my little Christmas present to me. Like I said, it seems like Christmas every day when I do look at my METAR maps. You can find out more at metarmaps.com. Up next for the pick of the week is Bill. You are up next on the pick of the week. What is your pick of the week?
I am. I can go right into the high altitude endorsement that Russ was talking about. I found a little article there with a bunch of reviews for pulse oximeters, a little thing you can clip to your fingertip and make sure that your blood oxygen saturation is good. When you are flying around in that pressurized airplane, something goes wrong, you'll know right away. A little precursor to hypoxia, you'll know. So good for your health and safety if you're flying around a small pressurized airplane or non-pressurized.
Absolutely, and you can find that Flying Mag has a link there. Yeah, unpressurized. Absolutely. Interesting stuff. Thanks, Bill. I appreciate that pick of the week. Leslie, what is your pick of the week?
All right. In the spirit of our topic today, my pick of the week is AOPA's transitioning to other airplanes course online, and it is free to use. It's about a 30 to 45-minute course, and it does have a 10-question quiz at the end of it. A lot of it is common sense, but there are some really good reminders, especially if you're looking to either get into a larger, more complex aircraft, or even, like we talked about earlier, downgrading to a smaller aircraft. This is a really good course to take, and it's not going to take much of your time, just, take an hour at the most. And it also, if you participate in the FAA Wings program, it is you can get wings credit for it as well. I did it this past week because I didn't want to give that as my pick of the week and not have completed the course myself. So that's my pick.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Leslie. I appreciate that. And something you can learn and also helps you even with your flight review with those wings credits. So that's terrific. So the next pick of the week is James. What is your pick of the week?
My pick of the week is Firefrost Engine Fire Suppression System. It's not necessarily new to the market, although it's being kind of rebranded and re-released. It's fully STC'd for the Cirrus aircraft, and I don't know about you, but one of my biggest fears flying a single-engine piston aircraft is a fire in the engine compartment. Although they can be rare, if it does happen, there's really not a lot of good options other than hopefully you can put it out by going faster. So a lot of the crash reports show that most of the data when people are killed in the actual fire after the crash as well. So I think it's a big a safety boost to the community, and it's definitely worth looking at. At the touch of a button, you could put a fire out in your engine compartment.
Well, thanks, James. Honestly, I did, and this is nothing new, I guess, for smaller aircraft. I've never seen one before, so that's awesome. Thanks for that pick of the week, James. I appreciate that. And Russ, one of the things I miss most about Russ being on here often is that there's always something that I get from Russ to read. So, Russ, let me guess what your pick of the week is. It's probably a book.
It's always a book, Carl. I'm at 51 books this year so far, so I think I'm doing pretty good.
Wow.
So actually, James, I thought you were stealing my thunder because you mentioned my book earlier in the show about using checklists. And so the book is called The Checklist Manifesto, How to Get Things Right by, I'm going to murder the name, but it's Atul Gawande, maybe. And he's a doctor and discusses the B-17, like you talked about, and the initiation kind of checklist in aviation, but how medicine has still not really adopted this checklist use mindset, and how he was able to implement some checklists in various hospitals that he would travel around and kind of train them up on how to use these checklists. Even something just as simple as, how to set up the tools that they're going to use for that surgery, and how to make sure that the person got the right type of anesthetics and this kind of stuff. Just double checking things, and the benefits were amazing. In number of reduced infection rates and even survival rates. And it was interesting to me as a pilot who uses checklists all the time to see another career field that is. They're trying to implement these things and seeing a lot of the crossover between aviation and medicine. And he also went in and discussed some other careers like construction management and such. So it isn't exactly an aviation book, although it talks a lot about aviation things. But it really highlighted to me the importance of using checklists by using examples from other career fields that you might not think about. So highly recommended. There's a link in the show notes. And Carl, I get most of my books either off, I read them on the Kindle. I download them from my local library's, Kindle site. I mean, most of the books I read are free or very, very cheap.
Yeah, well, we appreciate
That's
that.
the way I like it.
And
So,
and by the way, if you do click on the link, it does help us produce this show. We do get a little bit of a commission from this to help produce everything here. And Russ, I can't wait to hear your next pick of the week, which I'm sure is going to be a book again.
I'm sure it will be.
Guys,
I've got a lot. It's been a couple of years, years episodes, so I got a lot saved up.
51 books, is that this year so far, you said?
That's this year so far.
Wow, that's incredible. You are a voracious reader, that is for sure.
I do like to read.
Yeah,
yes.
that is for sure. Well, Russ, appreciate your being here. Leslie, James, and Bill, really some great insight. And if you're somebody who thinks that you either have too much airplane, are considering buying too much airplane, or renting too much airplane, I hope you got something out of this. Maybe you have some comments. Maybe there's something that you might want to add to this discussion. Real easy, contact at stuckmikeavcast.com. Also, comment down the show notes below, and make sure that what's most important is that, don't let this passion for aviation go unnoticed by yourself, or just don't let it sit there. do something. Do something today to keep your passion moving. That's why you're doing this. That's why you're listening to this podcast here, about learning to fly, living to fly, and loving to fly. And that's why we love bringing this to you. We want to reignite that passion or keep that flame burning. Until next episode, we'll see you later. Safe flying out there.